Hey guys, James again with TFB TV. Now I love guns, I love movies, and I love making TFB TV videos, so I think it's a little overdue for me to do the top 5 gun movies. And this is top 5 gun movies from a gun guy. Now, as a lot of you regular viewers know, as long as it doesn't involve Glock, I like to make a totally unbiased top 5 list. So I employed a few different methods to try to make sure that this list was as fair as possible this time. So 2 criteria. Number 1, I asked the Patreon supporters. First of all, if you guys aren't supporters on Patreon, get on there. There's a bunch of cool perks. One of the things that we did in advance of making this list is I consulted the guys on Patreon. I said, hey, nominate some films and then we'll vote on them. So that was really fun. We got hundreds of responses. And it was really exciting to see those results as they rolled in. Now, number 2 is a little bit more subjective. It's kind of a formula I've come up with myself. It's the guns to plot ratio. Now, there's really no debate. It seems like the more guns you have in a film, there's an inversely proportional relationship to the quality of the story. So more guns, more action, generally you're going to have a thinner plot and the movie's not going to be as good. So to talk about a few honorable mentions that didn't make the list and using them as good examples of a high gun to quality, gun to plot ratio. Die Hard is a great example. Saving Private Ryan, Django Unchained. All really good movies that also had a lot of really fun gunplay. So when you're looking at a really low gun to plot ratio, you're talking about basically any John Woo film and maybe like porn. You know, literally pornography. There is a ton of action and it's all held together by this super thin plot that is there just to give all the action sequences a pretext for existing. All right, so to get straight into the list, number 5. For number 5, oh my God, I actually hate this series of films. But to show you guys what a fair guy I am, how objective I'm trying to be, I'm still going to include the most try-hard series of films I've ever seen in my life since Get Shorty, and that is the John Wick series of films. John Wick and John Wick 2 are 2 of the cheese-dickiest, cringiest films that I think I've ever seen. However, they did really well in the box office. You guys loved them. This was far and away number 1 on the Patreon poll. And there's no 2 ways about it. Critics loved the films and they were blockbusters. So hey, maybe it's only me. But when I see dialogue like this,
$7 million is a lot of money, Mr. Wick.
You want a war? Or do you want to just give me a gun?
Somebody please get this man a gun.
that is full Michael Scott butt cheek clenching cringe. I thought that scene, and that's all of John Wick. It's all like that. And I love Keanu. I love him. He's my cousin, Keanu Reeves. He's awesome. He's a really nice guy. But for whatever reason, he is not firing on all cylinders in the John Wick films. I mean, that scene, me want gun. I mean, it's terrible. Not to mention the totally cringe Lawrence Fishburne trying to recapture that Matrix magic with a "somebody get this guy a gun." Oh my God, that is embarrassing. Even the director of John Wick 2 said it was kooky. The dialogue's totally cornball. The super secret assassin club that apparently heavily invests in the hospitality industry is so far-fetched to the point where it's beyond ridiculous. The action sequences border on gun kata, and the bad guys are basically anime villains. But you know what? You have to give credit where it's due, and the John Wick series of films do an outstanding job of making really slick, high-speed, low-drag action sequences. And it's obvious that the producers, directors, technical advisors really knew their shit when it came to guns. You'll get some action sequences where John Wick will shoot like 30 rounds from a Benelli without ever topping off. But like my wife Lindsay said when she saw the movie, they reload enough to show you that they're not reloading. So hey, good enough, right? Keanu Reeves absolutely killed it. He did all his own stunts, he did the driving, he did the martial arts, and he did the shooting. Everybody saw that video where Keanu was training at Terran Tactical, absolutely shredding it. He was training under the extremely talented Taron Butler, who, even though is on the Larry Vickers diet and exercise program, just like Larry, he can really shoot. But that all said, he did a fantastic job working with Keanu, whose gun handling skills were prime in John Wick 2. So I complained a little bit about the John Wick films, but what did I love about the John Wick films? I love that they gave a crap to try to make it accurate, and I love that they cared enough to put their actors through training, show them how to be proficient with gun handling, and it all shows because the action sequences are totally seamless. I also loved the 11.5-inch Bravo Company Taron Tactical Mashup AR-15 from John Wick 2. I've got almost the exact same setup at home. I also love that in John Wick 1, all the gaudy Russian gangsters use salient Glocks, because when I think of a gun that a gaudy Russian gangster would use, it would be a salient Glock. And one of my favorite aspects of John Wick 2 is Lawrence Fishburne's general attitude towards his Kimber 1911. We've all got that freeloading buddy who shows up, doesn't bring any beer, and is always poking through your fridge. So you want to make sure to have some High Life or some really crappy beer on tap for him for whenever he shows up, and invariably starts asking for freebies. So John Wick shows up to Lawrence Fishburne's place, is like, hey man, I don't have a gun, I need a gun. And Lawrence Fishburne's like, give him the Kimber. So some other things that I didn't like about John Wick. John Wick 1, in that movie, he uses not a Glock P30 made in not Austria. But fortunately, in John Wick 2, that annoying Italian guy with that weird Flava Flav necklace introduces him to the new breed of Austrians.
I can wholeheartedly endorse the new breed of Austrians. Glock 34 and 26.
And sets him up with a Glock 26 and a Glock 34. But it does kind of crack me up that it's like the new breed of Austrians when Gaston hasn't done shit with that gun since 1983. I thought the passive-aggressive silencer fight was kind of weird. I didn't like that. I thought it was weird. Another thing, the Glock 26 with a pinky extension. Saw that quite a bit. Why not just use a Glock 19? And I love all the assassin fights in Manhattan. I can tell you from personal experience, it's impossible to take a piss outside in Manhattan without NYPD getting all up in your business. And the all black suit thing was kind of lame. I know one of you dorks probably wore that to prom, thought you looked like John Wick when you really looked like Regis Philbin. And one more time, the cringiest line, "Will somebody please get this man a gun?" Jesus. All right, so moving on to my number 4 pick. You guys know I usually use the number 4 to kind of make a controversial pick. If anything, it's to kind of set my lists apart from everybody else's, and I always try to substantiate it. So you won't see this movie probably on any other kind of gun movie list, but I think it deserves a spot, and if you hear me out, you might agree with me. That movie is District 9. Now, nobody nominated this movie in the Patreon poll, but come on, man. You've got some great real-life guns, and you got some great make-believe guns, and they're all used to totally grisly effect. It's a gritty urban combat film, and it's got an extremely high gun-to-plot ratio. You've got a lot of gun battle scenes, a lot of really gruesome ones too, but this movie was nominated for 4 Oscars, and deservedly so. It was a great movie, an emotional film, poignant, had almost an Atticus Finch To Kill a Mockingbird kind of vibe to it. And it has a piss load of really awesome guns. Now again, this is a South African film, takes place in South Africa, so you had a bunch of badass South African guns. Heavily featured was the Vector CR21. You had the R5 Galil clones, you had the R1 FAL clones, and you even had the NTW-20, which Denel makes and markets as an anti-material rifle. This is a 20mm rifle. It's never been featured in any other film before. But if you want to know what's even more badass, if I'll take a quick aside, is this super awesome 90s style infomercial that Denel made to market the NTW-20. Check this thing out. It's like G.I. Joe meets Commando meets American Gladiators.
Efficient muzzle brake, a spring buffer, and 2 interchangeable hydraulic dampers. The barreled action and magazine are free to recoil in the frame of the weapon.
God, I hope the guy that made that commercial was promoted to CEO. That is awesome. So you had a bunch of really cool government guns that you didn't see that often, but you also had kind of the Somali pirate vibe with the squatters that lived in District 9, all having AKs that were kind of rugged, beat up. And I'm not really big into sci-fi guns in sci-fi movies, but they did such a good job with the alien weaponry in District 9.
Oh, holy shit!
And in my opinion, there's no more subtle hat tip to the gun guy crowd than when you have a protagonist or an antagonist with a really cool trademark weapon. In this movie, it would be Kubis with the Vector R6, which is basically a shortened South African Galil clone. Finally, in my opinion, the closing action sequence is one of the best urban shootouts from any film pretty much ever. You had the MNU descending upon District 9 and battling out with Vicus and with the squatter faction. You even have a mech suit. And there was that one part, guys, that those of you who saw it, where I swear to God, I started crying like my mom at my first communion. It touched me. You guys know what part I'm talking about.
Listen, you go ahead. You can make it.
But in any event, District 9 definitely deserves a spot in the top 5. You not only had a bunch of badass real-life guns, a bunch of badass, well-thought-out fictional guns, but you had a great and an emotional story to cap it all off. Then you've got the mech suit cherry on top. So, District 9, number 4. Now, moving on to number 3, the Terminator series of films. And I say Terminator series, but I really mean Terminator 1, Terminator 2, and maybe Terminator Salvation. Great gun guy movies. And Terminator 2 is probably one of my most favorite films of all time. Now to kick it off, in Terminator 1 you have that iconic gun store scene that is a piece of gun guy movie lore and always has been, always will be.
Anything else?
Phased plasma rifle in the 40-watt range.
Hey, just what you see, pal.
But Terminator 1 was a great action film slash thriller slash sci-fi film. Now Arnold kicked all kinds of ass in Terminator 1, have 80s guns in it. Of course you gotta have the Uzi in there. But if he was good in Terminator 1, he was flawless in Terminator 2. From a gun guy perspective, Terminator 2 had some of the best gun mechanics from any film. I love the use of reloads as a source of tension.
I'm out. Come on. Here.
Reload.
You had a bad guy who was basically a walking hunk of ballistic gelatin who showed you that 9mm totally sucked, 45 was better, but the only thing better than a plasma rifle in the 40-watt range is a shotgun in the 10-gauge range. If you ask a gun guy what their favorite scene was from Terminator 2 and they don't have an answer, they're not really a gun guy because everybody's got a favorite scene from Terminator 2. You have Arnold's introduction scene.
I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle.
And speaking of cock, you had Arnold spin cocking a Winchester 1887 on the back of a Harley. You had the showdown at the mall with the great scene where Arnold retrieves a shotgun out of a bouquet of roses. And of course, when Arnold is at Cyberdyne using the minigun to take out all the cop cars, basically level a whole city block and then put down an entire SWAT team without killing anyone. That was really cool. So it's my favorite scene, probably the truck chase sequence where Arnold purposefully gets out of the truck, walks into the bed of the truck, gets on top of the semi driven by the T-1000 and takes an M16, does a full mag dump in the face, neck, head, and chest area on Agent John Doggett. That was an incredible scene. Now briefly, I wanted to say that I thought Salvation was totally underrated as a gun film. I love it when post-apocalyptic films, instead of using like energy-based weapons, are using projectile-based weapons, and that's what they do in Terminator Salvation. In fact, it's basically like a huge HK commercial suggesting to the viewer that perhaps the only guns that survived Judgment Day were the ones made in the Black Forest of Germany. You've got an HK Mark 23 heavily featured John Connor sidearm. You've got a UMP-9. You've got an MP5 SD. And of course, you've got John Connor's totally sick HK416 that has a Seymour and a Surefire light. I've got the same Seymour on my MP5 at home. They even throw G36 in there for good measure, and you've got some really exciting light and heavy machine gun action sequences and some military operation sequences that are just really cool. So while there were some plot holes, make sure to give Salvation a look if you're a gun guy, because at least you'll enjoy it. Oh, okay, I can already hear you guys groaning about this, but number 2 is gonna be the Matrix series. Now, I say Matrix series, but I mean the Matrix and the Matrix Reloaded, because the Matrix 3 Revelations Revival, whatever the hell it was, that was like warm cat shit. It was terrible. But guys, you really got to give it to the Matrix. It really is a gun movie through and through. You've got a wide variety of guns, excellent action sequences, and unlike John Wick, I think you've got a little bit more creative and innovative plot, even if it does borrow from the 17th century Cartesian thought experiment, like the brain in a vat thing. Still, really cool and a great concept for a film. I know that everybody, the first time they watched it, even though by the time you get around to the third one, you're kind of tired of it, everybody knew Matrix 1 was totally awesome, and you still enjoyed 2. But guys, for a movie made in 1998, it was very inclusive. It had a cornucopia of guns. Now, whether you're an FN guy, whether you're a Beretta guy, HK even had an HK slap or 2 in there. Matrix really didn't matter what kind of gun you like, your gun was in there, unless you're a 1911 fan. There wasn't a single one in the Matrix series, so I guess even in the fake internet world, the 1911 sucks. But a quick fact to throw at you, the Matrix, the 1998 version, was the first one to feature the Gen 3 Glock, which had just been introduced. So that's kind of cool. Another interesting piece of knowledge, the firearms technical advisor was totally against giving deagles to the agents because he said they were guns for wankers. And he's probably right, but the Wachowski brothers, they overrode him. They wanted these guys to have deagles, and they did. So what's great about The Matrix is it kind of has this blend of realism and excusable fantasy. So you have guns that generally obey the laws of physics, that need to be fired accurately, that need to be reloaded and manipulated properly, just like their real life counterparts. So while you had some silly gun handling in The Matrix, it was all excusable because, again, you've got guys that have software programs installed in their heads that instantly make them badasses. And even though that's totally far-fetched and fantastic, it's a little bit, in my opinion, easier pill to swallow. Of course, the whole lobby rescue scene is maybe one of the greatest gun scenes in the history of film, especially the 2 words that kicked it off.
Holy shit!
And you had a lot of HKs in this movie. You had that really cool scene with the 2 brothers that are like Rastafarian EDM cowboys, have the HK UMP-45. They're shooting out of the sunroof of an Escalade. So that was actually really neat, especially back in the day it was made. Still looks great, even though that movie's like almost 20 years old now, right? Unfortunately, there were a few firearms errors. For example, that scene I was just talking about, they're shooting the UMP-45, which is chambered in 45 ACP. As all my 1911 buddies have told me, after they shot that Cadillac, 1 or 2 times it should have exploded from the 45 ACP. So I think maybe they accidentally used 9mm in that sequence. So what did I love about The Matrix? You had a lot of guns that generally obeyed the laws of physics, good variety, and all of the gun action sequences, even though there were many and they could run a little long, they were part of the plot and they didn't detract from it as much as they added to it. I also love Morpheus riding dirty with the Glock 18 sitting on his console, just like when I drive to work here in New Orleans. I also love that it had the mandatory armory scene.
Okay, so what do you need besides a miracle?
Guns. Lots of guns.
Somebody please get this man a gun.
And that was a really cool scene, but Morpheus is just so over the top in that part. That was so weird. The number 1 film was number 2 on the Patreon poll, a distant second, in fact. But this film has been praised for its realism, has been praised for the technical accuracy, the skill of the actors, not only for the gun sequences, but in their performances. And I'm gonna say this movie is on fire because it is heat. This is an exceptional film. You've got like a great thriller and a great action film and a great drama all rolled into one movie with awesome guns and an even better star-studded cast. Come on, you got Bobby D, you got Alpa, you got Val Kilmer, John Voight, you even have a cameo from Henry Rollins. And even though this film wasn't nominated for any Academy Awards, it was critically acclaimed, with Roger Ebert saying that it was eloquent, insightful, fanciful, poetic when necessary, and that the actors weren't trapped within cliches. Unfortunately, Heat debuted at kind of a bad time. That was at the same time as Jumanji and Toy Story. So it opened at number 3 in the box office, but it's still a legendary film, especially if you're a gun guy. You've got, again, a wide variety of common and less common pistols. You've got SIG, you've got 1911, you've got Glock, you even have Star, the Spanish company, and you even have a Ruger P Series make a cameo in there. But the real stars, of course, are the PDWs and the carbines that the guys use in the film. You've got HK SMGs, Steyr SMGs, you've got Colt SBR 6 and 7 series rifles, badass FNs like the FAL and the FNC, 308 HKs like the HK91, and you even have Tom Sizemore in the bank heist scene using a Galil. So why is this movie number 1 on the list? Well, you've got a foundation with an incredible and compelling story. You've got some of the best actors of our time in their prime in this film. It was De Niro and Al Pacino the first time that they were in a movie together, and obviously they slayed it. But again, the gun handling in this film was incredible without being over the top. It was very realistic, very pragmatic. They had SAS technical advisors on site, and man, did it show. All of the actors were well trained. You've got them using sights. Bad guys laying full auto suppressing fire. You've got the good guys shooting semi-automatic shots, presumably to keep from harming civilians. You've got Robert De Niro with a Mozambique.
Look at me. Look at me.
And if you didn't have a crush on Val Kilmer after Tombstone, you certainly did after you saw him do that badass combat reload at the heist scene. And in fact, that sequence you just saw allegedly is shown to military law enforcement as an example of a perfectly flawless combat reload. So good on you, Val Kilmer. So I've got to close this list out by saying not only is Heat maybe the best gun guy movie of all time, but the bank heist sequence might be the best gun action sequence of all time. It's gritty, it's realistic, it's frantic, it's confusing. They do an excellent job with the cinematography, with a lot of moving cameras, a lot of quick cuts, over-the-shoulder perspective shots, a lot of really, really loud gunfire, and no music. And in fact, several law enforcement and military authorities have cited the bank heist scene as being one of the most accurate depictions of urban combat ever in cinema. And if you look Heat up on the internet, you'll see that it's actually pretty tightly based on a true story about a gangster in Chicago who would set up similar heists, and the law enforcement officer who is pursuing him. And while Heat gets a lot of credit for being one of the most realistic gun movies of all time, some of you more astute gun guys may have noticed that Al Pacino's character uses a 1911 and he shoots it many times throughout the film, but it doesn't jam once. Anyways, guys, I've been sitting here talking to this camera for an hour, so I'm gonna have to cut a lot of footage. I love these movies. This is my list. I hope you guys agree with me. I tried to keep it as fair as possible. Thank you so much to you guys on Patreon for helping me with this list, doing the poll, participating. You guys are awesome as usual. And I want to say thank you to our sponsors, Proxibid and Ventura Munitions. The guys at Proxibid have more guns than all these movies combined, so you better go check them out. In any event, thanks again, guys, and I will see you next week.
Somebody please get this man a gun.